And it's Friday night with Byline Times. I'm Peter Jukes.
And I'm Hardeep Matharu. And over the next hour, we'll be bringing you what the papers don't say.
And what the TV doesn't tell you. Now, lawfare. What's that? Well, it's the use of Britain's draconian libel law to silence journalists and investigators. And we'll be finding out more by going down to the High Court in London. The case of Observer journalist Carol Cadwallader, who's being challenged by the Leave EU funder Aaron Banks in a defamation suit. Multi-millions are at stake. We'll be talking to Rebecca Vincent from Reporters Without Borders, whether this is an example of silencing journalism. And we'll be discovering more, because earlier today I spoke to Liam Byrne MP, who was in a debate yesterday in the House of Commons, said that this form of lawfare was a strategic part of silencing opposition and a part of hybrid warfare in the context of Russia's potential attack on Ukraine.
And with allegations that Conservative whips were blackmailing Tory MPs this week to prevent a revolt against the Prime Minister, it's been another scandalous week for the government. But Boris Johnson appears to be clinging on. Why? Well, we'll be joined in the studio by Byline Times' own Otto English, who last year made one of our most watched videos, The Truth About Boris Johnson. We'll be finding out from Otto why it's taken so long for this truth to emerge. But we've also had to contend this week with Operation Red Meat, with the Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries announcing that the TV licence fee will be frozen for 2 years and then abolished. Where does that leave the BBC? Well, to discuss that, we'll be joined in the studio by the acclaimed social and cultural critic and the co-author of the book, The War Against the BBC, Peter York. And then we'll also be in discussion with Benjamin Loughnane of the Bow Group think tank to get a perspective of what those on the right think about the future of the BBC.
And if that all sounds a bit heavy and that all sounds a bit like hard work, we'll end the show with an amazing interview with Super Tansky, the comedian who's gone viral on TikTok, and have a slightly more humorous look at the events of the last week. Right, though, you know, we make you laugh, we make you cry, and the only way we can do that is by you funding us. We have no oligarchs, no in the background, Russian or otherwise, or from Dubai. We rely on you. And you can help us and keep us going by signing up on our Patreon account. That's Patreon/Byline TV. Or if you're watching on YouTube now, there's a little button in the top right corner and you can help fund us. And if you do, Hardeep, what happens?
Yes, if you do, then there's unique access to exclusive content, there are discounts, and you can also see our After Dark Q&A, which takes place every week after the live show ends. It'll be with myself and Peter, and this week we'll be joined by Peter York.
And, you know, we like to build a community. It's not just about funding us. It's making sure we get your questions. You can ask us anything you like in the After Dark, and we can be a bit indiscreet, and Peter York maybe joined by the other guests. But also, we'd like you to do something which we enjoy doing on the paper, or rather people started doing with the Byline Times, who've just done this month's print edition. They photograph at all kinds of weird places with their cats in their right-wing mother-in-law's doorstep or something like that. So why don't you, for a bit of fun, while you're watching the TV show, take a picture and then post it on YouTube, Twitter.
Take a picture of your right-wing mother-in-law's sitting room and let us know that you're watching Friday Night with Byline Times.
And the hashtag is Byline TV Live. That's Byline TV Live.
We'll try and show some of those, won't we?
Yeah, they better be good. They better be good. But on a more serious note, our front page, Hardeep, our digital front page, as I said, we've done the print edition this week. So if we stumble a little bit, that's because of sleepless nights. But every week we do a digital edition, and the headline of our digital edition this week is after my piece, isn't it? It's called The Hangover. You have to read my bit about Bullingdon Club. But if we scroll down, there's some just as important stuff about the cost of living, isn't there, Hardeep?
Yes, I mean, again, with the government in absolute chaos, there's, it's all happening against a backdrop of, one, continued COVID-19 cases, even though all restrictions are going to be lifted in the coming week, but also the fact that in terms of people's everyday lives, let alone these scandals that are happening in and around Downing Street and Westminster and in very small, narrow circles of people with power, everyday people are really struggling, and in particular, people who are already, on low incomes, or already people who are marginalised in society. And there was a great tweet thread this week. I think it's had more than 10 million
14 million.
views.
Jack Monroe.
Yeah, Jack Monroe.
Who's writing for us on this.
Fantastic. And she really managed to highlight what is going on in terms of, when we talk about cost of living, it's not, obviously there's inflation, but the way it's portrayed by the mainstream media, it's not accurately getting across how much people are actually being impacted, because you've got sort of a bag of pasta that's gone up from sort of 30 pence to like 70 pence, and it's really significant. And what was really interesting in that thread is that there was a comparison between those everyday items which people need, and then sort of quite posh ready meals that you get, which haven't increased. A $7.50 lasagna is still a $7.50 lasagna. So there's certain people being marginalised, and we've taken a bit of a look at how austerity, which a much maligned policy ever since David Cameron, how that possibly is returning, and looking at how deprived and marginalised areas are just not going to be levelled up in any way.
Yeah, this is going to be a big theme, I think, this coming spring, with cost of living going up, energy prices, tax hikes, and obviously universal credit has remained down. The other story, obviously, on that front page is the story of what happened in the High Court. This week we got a great report from John Sweeney about the first 2 days of the trial. I spent 2-3 days there. Slightly to your annoyance, I think, Hardeep, we should have done the print edition, live tweeting it. And just to explain before we go to the High Court, that this case, Carol Cadwalder, award-winning Observer journalist, broke many big scandals, particularly the Cambridge Analytica scandal. I had some peripheral part in that with the whistleblower Chris Wiley, and has caused huge ructions. Facebook, Zuckerberg was called to Congress, Facebook tanked by 75 billion. But she gave a TED talk 2 years later where she mentioned some work we did together on Aaron Banks and his meetings undisclosed with the Russian embassy. And for that one line in the TED talk, she is being sued potentially for millions of pounds and losing her house. Not so much on the damages, it's the cost of going to court.
Yeah, it's such an important case, and as you pointed out, Peter, it's one that, again, the establishment media hasn't really covered in any detail, and Carol has faced attack after attack in recent years. I have to say, a lot of misogyny, a lot of personal attacks, which are appalling, and is exactly the reason why women don't want to go into professions like journalism. But yeah, her case today, it was the last day of the trial at the High Court. And Peter was there earlier talking to Rebecca Vincent from Reporters Without Borders, and they were looking at why the Carol Cadwalder case says something much wider about the state of British journalism.
So I'm outside the Royal Courts of Justice on a cold Friday lunchtime, and a lunchtime break on the last day of the trial of Aaron Banks versus Carol Cadwalder. An amazing case. Carol Cadwalder, the Observer journalist, challenged for libel by Aaron Banks, the businessman who funded, to the tune of £8 million, Leave EU, Nigel Farage's campaign. Carol herself is defending the alleged libel on the grounds of public interest. It was one line in a TED talk where she said that Aaron Banks had told consistent lies about his connections with the Russian government. It was a challenging time for the Observer journalist Carol Cadwalder as she faced 3 days of intensive cross-examination by the QC for Aaron Banks, William McCormick. But, as we'll see, the judgment will be reserved and we don't know the outcome of the trial, but it is a vital one on the public interest defence for journalists. The main attack by the claimant, Aaron Banks' lawyers, was that Carol Cadwalder had not displayed sufficient public interest journalism, that it was inaccurate, it was motivated by a personal vendetta and was part of a campaign about Russian interference. To counter that, Cadwalder's lawyers submitted a 40,000-word witness statement after forensic analysts had searched all her devices for hundreds of thousands of bits of data. full disclosure, I worked with Cal Cadwallader on the Russian meetings with the VU, including Arron Banks, for which he seemed to have an inconsistent number for many years. So I'm joined now by Rebecca Vincent from Reporters Without Borders. Rebecca, first, you've been in court most of these last 5 days. What's your impression of this as a defamation case?
This case has the potential to be a really landmark test of the public interest defense in this country. So we're here as NGO observers, not as journalists. We monitor trials and cases related to press freedom. And we're here because we consider this case a very clear example of SLAPP, which is abuse of the law, in this case abuse of defamation law, intended, we feel, to silence Carol Cadwallader's public interest reporting, intended to isolate her, to make an example of her, and to create a chilling effect on reporting in this country. SLAPP is quite jargony, strategic lawsuit against public participation. It exists everywhere, but now there's more knowledge of it as a means of trying to silence the press in particular, other forms of activism too. But what it means is abuse of the law. It can be defamation laws, but it can sometimes be other laws to silence public participation. So we have seen a number of really strong, courageous women journalists fighting back, maybe in a way that's a bit more vocal, a bit more vociferous than others. Carol is a great example. What she's doing here is so courageous. Her own home is even on the line. Catherine Belton is fighting back. We've seen Claire Rucastle-Brown, who's facing such litigation in Malaysia. Caroline Muscat in Malta. She runs the Shift News. She's published every threat of a slap she's ever received. So yes, there are some incredible women journalists that are calling this out, that are fighting back. But we need more of this. We need more, not just journalists willing to speak out about it, but more solidarity when they do. We need even the bigger media outlets, a bit more recognition from them that this happens. Often this has been a bit of an open secret for years because in-house media lawyers might get these threats, they might quietly comply with them and not sort of expose them for what they are. We need more of that. Let's shed light on what this is, let's call it what it is, and let's fight back together and stop leaving individual journalists at risk in this way.
So the question is, who's really in the dock? Is it Carol Cadwallader, or is it public interest journalism everywhere? And if it is the latter, as a friend of hers, I must admit, but someone who's seen her at work for the last 4 years, there's no doubt that Carol Cadwallader is an excellent representative of due diligence with journalists.
You were very emotional when the case ended, weren't you, Peter, this week?
Yeah, seeing somebody go through that. I was emotional when Carol came off the stand. A 3.5-day onslaught over, I think I mentioned that, 180 data points, all this evidence. She had to surrender all her devices, a top QC, serried ranks of lawyers nibbling away on her own without her publisher. I just thought it's a tremendous ordeal she's been going through for 2 years. And she's only served the public good.
And yesterday there were developments in Parliament that looked at this wider issue of lawfare.
Yeah, the strategic lawsuits against public participation, they're called SLAPP cases. And brilliantly, the Labour MP, Liam Byrne, teamed up, we'll talk to him in a moment, with David Davies, the famous leadership contender for the Conservative Party, to somehow do something about lawfare in the UK, because oligarchs come from all overseas to have their legal cases here because the laws are on their side. But as we'll see in a moment, Liam Byrne makes this a bigger thing. It's about data protection, but also this thing he calls hybrid warfare. So hybrid warfare, that is a concept invented by the Russians, alternative measures, and they did display during Ukraine and the first invasion in 2014, whereby you do online attacks, you take down classical infrastructure, you disrupt the argument with bots and troll factories, you hack people to get information and put that in the public domain. And he thinks, especially with the tensions between Putin and, if you like, the West now, that at the forefront, in a way, the London courts are where this alternative war is going on. And of course, London is where the oligarchs, not just Russian, but a lot of Russians, launder their money. And I spoke to him earlier today about exactly that. Liam, thanks for joining us from East Birmingham. Now, there was an amazing debate yesterday in the House of Commons, which I believe you sponsored with the Conservative MP, David Davies. Can you tell us why you decided to initiate the debate about lawfare in the UK and what you discovered in the process of preparing for it?
So a number of us have been warning about Russia's hybrid war with us and the West for the last 4 years. I laid out to the House of Commons President Putin's dark social playbook about 4 years ago that involved the way that information was hacked, leaked, weaponized on fake news sites, and then dark money came in to promote it via Facebook to millions of people. But David Davies and I basically saw a new front being opened in this hybrid war, which was our court system. English courts are being used to kill the truth. They're being used to silence journalists like Catherine Belton and Carol Cadwallader and Tom Burgess. And, you know, what that means is that journalists can't follow the money to pursue the corrupt, to hunt down the truth, because the court system is being used to threaten journalists with multi-million-pound legal bills that they could never meet, and that means they can't get published.
So what do you think is the solution to this, apart from hopefully the Cadwallader case might set up some public interest defence, create a clearer bar for that? Is there a kind of misuse, as often with London concierge services, of our law firms, highly esteemed law firms, but our libel laws, which are really some of the most draconian, at least when it comes to journalists in the Anglo-Saxon world?
So the problem is not just our libel laws. So defamation cases are being used to intimidate journalists, but the GDPR laws are being misused because bad people will flood investigators with subject access requests to smoke out, you know, what it is they're up to. Bill Browder was actually threatened with cross-border insolvency legislation when the Russian government manufactured a tax liability and bankrupted a company of his in another country. So what we've got to do is actually what they've done in about 31 states in America is create what's called slapback laws. So this legal action taken against journalists is now so common, it's got an acronym, SLAPS, Strategic Legal Action Against Public Participants. But American states are fighting back. They've got slapback laws that basically allow a judge to dismiss a case very rapidly if it's clear the case is being used to stop a journalist following the truth. We need that in our court system, but we also need disincentives, you know, against some of these law firms who are making millions out of trying to kill the truth in courts. So it's quite a big bit of legal reform that we need, and what we saw in the Commons yesterday is a cross-party consensus for getting that done.
So that's fantastic news. And do you think that there's a possibility to change the current defamation laws or all those other laws? Or is there sort of a wider protection needed? We see that Vladimir Putin is apparently massing troops not only on the Russian border with eastern Ukraine, but also in Belarus. Do you think there's actually a wider geopolitical movement going on, which actually needs to be resolved at a very high level?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, the government has taken years to wake up to the way hybrid war is a different kind of conflict. So, you know, this is not just a battle for on land or sea or air. You know, this is a battle for narrative, for hearts and minds. And so, you know, that means that this kind of war is fought with tweets as well as tanks, and now it's being fought with writs in English courts. So we have to understand now that the battlefront today stretches from the streets of the Crimea and the Donbass to the troll farms of St. Petersburg to the law courts of London. You know, the agents of President Putin now are not just little green men in the Ukraine, they are little wigged men in English courts. And, you know, they are basically helping in our courts. Our courts are being used to help people shut down the truth being told about oligarchs who are funded with Russian money. And they're an important link in the chain because remember, these people look after the assets of the Putin regime outside Russia. So they're a really key part of the conflict.
This is where they feel their assets are safe. That's why they come to London. And obviously, there are various sanctions that could be imposed if a move has happened in eastern Ukraine. But isn't at the heart of it the fact that London is described by many, including Robert Savioni, who wrote about the mafia extensively in the Andrangheta? London is the centre of the legitimizing of kleptocrats' money. Is that the other strategic front, that if London wasn't so lax with its offshore territories and wasn't such a centre of money laundering, we'd be less the centre of this lawfare?
Oh, without a doubt. It's an ecosystem in London, and it includes not just the banks, but the tax advisors, the lawyers, the PR agencies, the investigators, the cyber specialists. London's like a one-stop shop for bad guys trying to hide money and, crucially, use some of that money to influence politics. So, the debate I did earlier in the week about the elections bill basically tries to take aim at millions of pounds of money that has come from Russian-linked business people into the Conservative Party. And, surprise, surprise, the government didn't accept the amendment. So we've got a systemic problem here. And the point is, it's all very well sending anti-tank missiles to the Ukraine, but what are we going to do against the anti-truth grenades that are being thrown at our journalists in English courts? We can't be strong abroad if we're weak at home.
Liam, that is a brilliant conclusion. Thanks so much for shedding light on very complicated matters, but you've managed to tie all together. Thank you.
So if you have signed up on Patreon or YouTube, you can attend our After Dark Q&A, which will take place after the live show ends tonight with our guest Peter York and myself and Peter Jukes. And if you have done that, then you should be getting an email very soon giving you the link to find that After Dark Q&A. But there's still time to sign up, so please do. But now we must come again, unfortunately, to the scandals of the government. It's been another week where Boris Johnson has clung on to power. We're now joined by Byline Times' own Otto English to look at why that might be. Otto, great to see you again.
Great to be back.
With Boris Johnson, who would have thought that he would be an integrity-lacking, lying and bordering on corrupt Prime Minister?
I know.
Who would have thought that?
No, I agree. It's a complete mystery, isn't it?
It is a mystery.
If only there had been some clues, in his CV and backstory as to the fact, as you say, that he was a lying, dishonest, deceitful, arrogant, self-centered, self-promoting buffoon. There was nothing there to give us any hints.
Inkling.
Yeah, no hints.
Not even an
and
inkling.
if only people had written about it or made videos warning about his past behaviour. And for example, I don't back in 2004 when he was Shadow Culture Secretary, the job itself of Culture Secretary now being held by one of the finest minds in the land, if not the world.
You mean the novelist Nadine Dorris? Today's
Much-loved novelist Nadine Dorris, yes. But anyway, back to Boris when he was Shadow. If only back then people had noticed that he was having an affair with Petronella Wyatt, and that, when that story broke, Boris said it was an inverted pyramid of piffle.
It's a great expression, inverted pyramid of piffle.
It is. It's one of the few smart things he's ever said.
Was it piffle?
It wasn't an inverted pyramid of piffle. It was fully upright. I was going to say a rude word, but
Heap
of dung. Yes,
right.
yes, of
Right.
truth.
Of
Dung
truth.
of truth. Yes.
Right. So what happened? What happened?
Yeah.
So back in 2004, when that story finally broke, and it was revealed that everything the press had been saying about Boris Johnson and Petronella Wyatt was true, Boris Johnson refused to resign. So even though he'd lied, I mean, really lied and kept lying and kept saying it was kept calling other people who were saying the truth liars, he refused to resign and had to be sacked. And, you know, Karl Marx and ABBA both said that history repeats itself. The history book on the shelf is always repeating itself.
And a famous song called Waterloo, which is about
by
a classic.
Karl Marx. No, so essentially, Boris's behaviour is repetitive. He's a recidivist liar, and his behaviour is the same. Back then in 2004, he was lying to his boss, Michael Howard. He was lying to his wife. And he was treating his girlfriend badly. Now, he's lying to 65 million people. He's treating 65 million people with contempt. And he's treating all of us who've gone through this pandemic and all of us who've had these, in many cases, terrible experiences of using loved ones with the same contempt he showed to those people in 2004. So my anger is less directed at him, more directed at the enablers who have permitted this ridiculous liar over a period of 20 plus years to the point where he's become the Prime Minister of our country.
So when Sonia Purnell, who was Johnson's biographer and also worked with him when he was a correspondent at The Telegraph, she was sitting there last week and she said that she was not shocked by his ambition. You know, he was always very much like, wants to be Prime Minister. But what she said is that essentially the real story here is it was everyone who enabled him and actually was cheerleading him from the sides. They actually wanted to be a bit like Johnson.
Boris.
But do you think, Otto, that this mixture of friends in the press, friends in all other sort of social circles, this enablement is the biggest scandal, rather than...
Yeah, well, as you know, one of my obsessions is the ridiculous class system which persists in this country and which enables a sort of tier of rather stupid people who often tend to be very rich and very well connected to keep driving forward and to keep getting these kinds of gigs. You know, Rees-Mogg, thick as a plank of, thick as a timber yard, you know, and yet because he puts on that suit, his armour, because he puts on the outfit, and he does this ridiculous act and goes around quoting bits of Latin which he's pilfered from the Dictionary of Quotations, people think he's some great statesman, and Johnson is very much of the same ilk. You know, Johnson really is not that smart. He's never brought anything brilliant to the table.
I wrote about it this week and I said he appealed to the affability, the sort of private eye, have I got news for you humour, but that palls very quickly. I mean, don't you feel that in a way all his virtues have become his vices, that act, the sort of chaos, the hair, the buffoon, the Latin tags, that dissipate? You've been a comedian. When your act fails, you get held off stage. Do you think it's collapsing like that?
Oh, I have no... So, returning to we have all been through this pandemic together. Yeah. It's been a war, essentially. We've all been through it in different degrees. Some people have had terrible, harrowing experiences. Some people have been at the front line. But all of us have been through it. All of us know people who've been through it. All of us know people who've had bad experiences. So this is a collective experience. And Boris Johnson won't get away with it for that reason. Because even though there might be a small percentage of people in this country who will go back to sticking with him, he has annoyed so many people. And the buffoon act is no longer funny. Yeah? He's the kid at the back who's been flicking rubbers at the teacher, and now he's thrown a brick through the window.
You think he'll cling on? You don't think he'll go?
I think he'll cling on because he doesn't have to go, and he's got that 80-seat majority. And I also think that the party doesn't necessarily, the parliamentary party doesn't necessarily want him to go.
And there's no obvious alternative. Well, Otto's done a update, or rather a remake of his classic, The Truth About Boris Johnson, which was a viral hit a year ago, and that'll be coming soon on YouTube and hopefully in your local cinema. Meanwhile, the BBC, as we said, Naryn Dorris has attacked it, frozen the licence fee, and promised to get rid of it. But before we talk to the style counsellor guru Peter York, let's see a clip from Russell T Davies a couple of years ago, whose own version of what did the Romans ever do for us? He has his own version of that. What did the BBC ever do for us?
On a week on HBO. So you've got 7 channels: HBO, HBO 2, HBO Signature, HBO Family, HBO Comedy, HBO Zone, HBO Latino. Doesn't that sound marvellous? You pay for that $15 a month, which is $180 a year, which equals like £118, so it's cheaper than the license fee. We think that's brilliant. What you get is no news, no voice, no soap opera, no weather, no radio stations, Radio 1, Radio 2, Radio 4, nothing like that. This is what I'm saying. You pay a full subscription fee, which is practically the price of a license fee. You get nothing. People in this country say we should have a subscriber service like HBO because it's the finest broadcaster in the world. It gives you nothing. All right, you get Game of Thrones, you get that for 10 weeks of the year. 1 hour a week. 10 weeks of the year, that's all you get. You're being led towards a subscriber service which you are being told is marvellous, and it's a lie. It gives you a couple of hours of good drama a week and nothing else. And that, in 10 years' time, is what they will demand the BBC becomes. And it is a disgrace.
So, what do the attacks on the BBC mean for the corporation's future? Well, we're thrilled now to be joined in the studio by none other than Peter York, the acclaimed social and cultural critic and the co-author of this, The War Against the BBC, his latest book, which is available now. Peter, thank you so much for coming back onto the blue sofa.
It's lovely to be here, and what a lovely sofa it is. It's
it
tremendously
is.
Smart.
So, the red meat that's been thrown by the government at the BBC this week, what do you make of it?
The Wit and Wisdom of Nadine Dorries.
The world's biggest book. The world's biggest book, I think.
The world's biggest book. It's a fantastic book. Look, she's very loyal, and what she was doing, in fact, was bringing forward something they'd done already, decided already, but for a certain area of headbanging Toriness, anything against the BBC is an easy score. So they love it. In the same way, they love the idea that Priti Patel put forward that you should have very large aircraft carriers roaming the channel to shoot down people in those little boats. And it went, that's meant to be red meat. In fact, attacking the BBC is very, very, very unpatriotic. Because the clue's in the name.
It is.
The clue's in the name. The British Broadcasting Corporation. And your defence for doing this, if you are somebody like Nadine Dorries, if you are her, your defence would be the idea that Netflix and its friends made the BBC out of date. In other words, the Silicon Valley Hollywood connection of American debt-funded big entertainers somehow made the BBC out of date. But the fact is, the BBC is what we've got between us and January the 6th. Now,
you mean the insurrection, the Capitol insurrection?
You may remember last week you had on the magnificent Sarah Churchwell, who said, I am not very confident about what's going to happen in America. I have 2 words for it: Fox News. Fox News, run by Lachlan Murdoch and its pals, the flotilla of lesser right-wing broadcasters behind it, have sustained the lie that the election was stolen. And in sustaining that, they've made America ungovernable. To make Britain go on being governable, you have to have something like the BBC so that we can have shared facts.
So in the past month, we had the head of editorial policy at the BBC tell a committee of the House of Lords that if there were a group of people who were increasing in number, who believed that the Earth is flat, then he believed it was legitimate to potentially invite them onto a show like this, hosted by the BBC, to put their point of view across. I guess what I'm trying to get at is there are sort of two things going on. There are perhaps legitimate criticisms of the BBC in recent years, that it's lost its way, especially in the era of Brexit and these lying politicians. Then there's this notion which appears to be coming from the red meat, which is it's too big for its boots, it needs to be put into its place, and it's funded by us, the government, and so it better get into place.
There are only two reasons people attack the BBC, and they're coterminous reasons. They're the same reason and the same people. One is we don't like publicly owned public service anything. That it's the same people who want the NHS to be better organised, meaning more slightly privatised. They are the same people.
And they're actually friends. Just to point out, one of the biggest, Dominic Cummings, who intrigues us both, former advisor to the Prime Minister and doing quite a lot of activity in the media at the moment, said that at the time of his think tank, which you know a bit about, that the BBC is the worst enemy, and his friend or co-Brexiteer, Lord Daniel Hannan, said the NHS is the big mistake. So it's kind of socialism.
Now, the fact is, Daniel Hannan is the person who went on a tour at the time of Obama's intended reforms, went on a tour of right-wing American stations saying that the NHS did triage for people in case they wanted them not to live. Triage, we live or die. Daniel Hannan is very, very fascinating.
Well, what's the second point?
The second point is commercial competition. That is why Rupert Murdoch was in the back door time after time after time with Cameron and Osborne shaping their policy about broadcasting. That's what that is. The BBC occupies a large place which could be a profitable space. If you had all those fascinating BBC audiences, you could make money out of them. So, one, you don't like public service anything, but you know when it comes to the NHS, that's not a good look. So you don't say so, but you get it across. In the case of the BBC has fewer defenders. You know, people aren't turning out to clap for the BBC. So it's an easy hit.
You don't think a lot of it's ideological, Peter?
It is, look, it is entirely ideological. The ideology is we don't like large public...
Rather than we want the BBC to report on the government line, or more favourably.
That too, they would like a cowed BBC which says exactly what they want. So Nadine Dorries said when Nick Robinson asked the Prime Minister to shut up for 1 second, you know, this word salad coming out at 1,000 miles a second, she said that Nick Robinson had lost the BBC a lot of support and money. That shows you where she's at. She wants a BBC that is very, very compliant. They want it to be smaller, but a compliant and not establishment serving, because the BBC is establishment serving generally.
But
they want
state
it to be,
broadcaster.
but they want it to be much more of a state broadcaster and much, much more pro the current Tory administration. That's what they want. It is desperately simple.
So we'll come back in a moment to talk with Benjamin Loughnane from the Bow Group, or the sort of right-wing opinion on this, which actually would agree with you. Maybe talk about the licence fee, whether that is key. But in the meantime, you know, we need to fund ourselves some way, and to get Benjamin on as a little sort of fillet so we can move him onto the chair. Here's a little ad we've just made about Byline TV and why we need your funding. We'll be back in a minute.
If Byline TV hadn't been formed a year ago, what would we not know? Well,
stuff to do it.
Fancy propaganda. We had to go on.
we wouldn't have had a team travelling across the country to speak to those who aren't usually given a voice, from refugees to farmers scared of their livelihoods to those living in poverty. What does modern Britain look like? If Byline TV hadn't been formed a year ago, what would we not know? Well,
staff to do it.
Fancy propaganda. We had to go on.
We wouldn't have had a team travelling across the country to speak to those who aren't usually given a voice, from refugees to farmers scared of their livelihoods to those living in poverty. What does modern Britain look like? Well, Byline TV has been on the case. We wouldn't have had a series of investigations exposing the lies of Boris Johnson's Vote Leave government, from Brexit to the coronavirus and many other events in between. And we wouldn't have had a weekly live show which goes beyond the headlines, looking at the structural issues in Britain today, interviewing some of the most thought-provoking experts in their field. And above all, you wouldn't have a truly independent news channel in Byline TV.
To get this far, to be truly independent from advertisers and oligarchs and media companies, we've still got one problem left, and that is over-reliance on big tech and their algorithms. We've looked at all the options and we've come up with one, our own site. It'll cost about £30,000, but it will keep Byline TV independent forever.
Byline TV is your TV station. We need your help to keep it here, keep it going, and keep democracy healthy.
So follow the link below, sign up, and be part of building a better media. To be joined again by Benjamin Loughnane, who's been with us before, very great guest, and always great to talk to about these things, where we often find points of consensus, unusually in the varying different political positions here. I don't know if you saw Peter's initial remarks, but is it possible that the BBC can be a kind of socialist thing because it's paid for, but also a national treasure? How do you feel in that debate between it being, because it's a great exporter of British values, if you like, British talent, David Attenborough, and live events. You know, we get joined together if we watch a live event, these classic things like, you know, unfortunately, Prince Philip's funeral, but also football and things like that. Is it possible to have an institution like that without it being slightly socially funded?
Well, I think whatever you think about the funding model of the BBC, we're so far into that now that billions, literally billions of public money has been invested into it over the years, and to sort of privatise that and then some sort of oligarch somewhere comes over and takes it over, that idea I think is probably a lot worse than the idea of it being publicly funded in the first place. Now, some people might not say we'd create the BBC today. When you've got a market-based media as we do now with so many different media companies, the idea of a publicly funded broadcaster being made today might not happen, but the fact that it does exist means that it needs to be preserved, but it needs to be democratised. I think that's the main thing. The idea that the BBC is not in any way, there's no public involvement in what's produced is, I think, the issue that most people have. It's what rankles. And the reason people want to pull it down, I think, is the same reason people want to pull down statues and art and whatever else they don't agree with. Because in a way, it's quite woke, the idea you want to destroy the BBC. It's got a woke act of exhilarating iconoclasm. But fundamentally, I think that the reason people feel that way is because they don't feel that they're being represented by the BBC.
Can I put that to Peter? I mean, I've worked at the BBC. I sort of did a long suicide letter to my career as a dramatist at the BBC in drama, saying why it couldn't be like The Wire because it was very top heavy. At that point, one woman, it could have been a man, was deciding 70% of the drama. Is Benjamin right that you could still have a BBC that it could be more democratic, it could be less hierarchy and run by these people like the editorial policy director who think flat earthers should be given a voice? He wouldn't say the same about Holocaust deniers.
Look, of course, you could make the BBC's performance, its representativeness, its democracy better. That's not the point.
But it's structure.
That's not what the people are who want to destroy the BBC are worried about. They couldn't give a toss about its democratic response, and they couldn't give a toss about its product. What they want is for something like that not to be there, because they are ideologically against.
And on the left as well, we must say.
We have to remember, once upon a time, in the early days of the Bow Group, for instance, people believed in something called a mixed economy, and it was a consensus. It was a right-left consensus in this country, and it sort of worked in quite a lot of ways. People thought that there was a case to be made for some things to be owned by the state, and some things not. it's worth pointing out the BBC is not owned by the state.
It's a corporation owned by the...
It's an independent corporation. It shouldn't be heavied so much by any government. Every
But yes,
government.
could I just, on that point, I mean, I'll ask you as well, I was always told it was arm's length, but it's been clear to me all my adult life, really from Bert onwards and Thatcher, and I'm sure it happened Green and under Wilson, that the government jerks its chain over the licence fee. There is no separation. Now, there is some, the chain isn't direct and it has to pull really hard, but is there a better way of making it
I think
arm's length?
The problem with any funding model, whatever it is there's always going to be someone on the other end of that money. There's always going to be someone who has control over the purse strings, and they're always going to have some degree of control, which is why I think democratisation is the only possible route to true editorial
How
freedom.
do you
But what does that
democratise the
mean?
money?
Well, because what I mean is that there needs to be more listening to what people actually want to see on the
Yeah.
BBC, rather than saying, no, we're going to tell you what you need to view because it's
Yeah.
for your own good. And I think that very didactic approach, which we've seen from the BBC, and you see some of the quite sneering tone that some people from the BBC have towards the people who watch it. Well, in general, the idea that certain views shouldn't be platformed, certain people shouldn't be platformed.
What views should?
Well, I'm not going to go into examples. I mean, we could be here all day if we would speak about specific cases.
With a lot of climate scientists.
Nigel Lawson, he's a
They
former
had
cabinet
Nigel
minister. He's
Law- they had
hardly a
Nigel
nobody, is
Lawson
he?
on with a lot of climate scientists, and that was the only rebuke
Right,
that
yeah.
Ofcom gave to the BBC.
Well, indeed.
But Benjamin, just apart from the points of view displayed, I just wonder how you fund it without, the democratisation, as it were, in the message of the listeners. I mean, the danger is you just represent what the people say, people's views. Is there not a mission, like a university has, not to just give the students what they want? You want to study, I don't know, Nintendo games, that it has a duty to inform.
No, absolutely. I think there's a mixture of the two. But at the one point I really do want to pick up on about what you said with regards to the people who really want to tear it down. Those people are what I regard as extremists. They are people who really want to destroy it for ideological reasons. But they would have less support if the BBC was more representative. If people felt that what the BBC was putting out was representative of their views and what they wanted to see,
They'd have
those
less,
people, like Nadine Dorries, would have less
they'd
support.
have less support if 80% by print sales of the national press weren't on their side.
Well,
It would be if they didn't have things like GB News, which of course nobody watches GB News, but if they didn't have things like talk radio against the BBC all the time, if they didn't have endless YouTube channels, you don't know who founded them, you don't know who pays for them, saying the licence-free goons are going to come and put your granny in prison tomorrow. If it weren't for that...
Well, on the point of the newspapers and things like Murdoch's media empire and so on and so forth, I see what you mean in the sense that it is in their interest editorially to do down the BBC because it eliminates competition. So I understand that. However, on the point of YouTube, for example, and sort of multimedia and the changing, evolving media landscape, things like Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, which are now far more relevant, I think, to most people's day-to-day media consumption than something like the BBC. The fact that the BBC is failing to compete in the new media landscape, that's another issue.
Competitive model, which doesn't hold water. 90% of British people use the BBC in some way every week. When they talk to people, some people don't even know what bits of the BBC are that they're using.
Well,
Could I just on that? I mean, we'll have to close soon, but on that issue which was raised by Peter about the insurrection, and in America, you actually have quite a stable newspaper environment, but very unstable, very competitive. The Fairness Act was dropped by Reagan. A very, and we have Fox News and One Nation America and all those. Does it matter if there is some level of truth? The problem on YouTube, if you just followed YouTube and Facebook, you may believe that coronavirus was created by Bill Gates and 5G, and the vaccine was trying to control you. Where's the standard of truth? And that applies to documentaries to a certain extent as well.
Well, you could have asked the same exact question about the creation of the printing press. So some 100 years ago, the idea that, oh no, this ability to create information and produce it and disseminate it has been democratized. How do we stop people getting the wrong information and make sure they get the right information?
We have encyclopedias built.
I think it's a natural process. You have that Wild West period where you've got the new media, everyone's producing everything, but slowly over time, the good stuff filters through and the bad stuff is filtered out. People chew the meat and they spit out the bone. And I trust in the intelligence of most people to know what to throw away and what to keep.
That is a very good point. And if you stay with us for our After Dark session, Peter and Benjamin will remain and we'll carry on this vigorous debate and get to the bottom of it. And that starts at 9:05 if you could sign up now. We're running a bit fast and late. There's so much to talk about. But in a minute, we'll be joined for a bit of light relief after this very polite debate about the licence fee and freedom of expression and truth. We'll be joined by Supertansky, the viral video comedienne, who we will see in a moment one of the clips, and she will be giving us her insight into the week's event and how on earth you can be a comedian in the time of Boris Johnson.
Utopia warning. I've not made any videos for a week. I've been what the doctor would describe as clinically fucked off, mate.
Oh, why are you clinically fucked off, Tan?
Well, I don't know. Because in the last 5 years, the world has gone off its tits. The US electing President Trump. The UK electing Boris Johnson, a human that consists of pure custard that I wouldn't even trust to look after my cats because he'd probably eat all their dinner and try and shag them. The man can't think, and he's running the country. Why? So he could push through Brexit, something that's only ever succeeded in ragging us right up the wrong one. We've got a government you can only rely on to be more cunty each week, care about two things, opinion polls
and deporting polls.
and then wondering why we haven't got any workers. Oh, that's a real head scratcher, isn't it? They're like fucking geese. Who knew that 2 + 2 is 4? The Tories appeased racists to get elected, undermined the opinions of experts, and look at where we are now. People eating horsewormer instead of taking medically approved vaccinations. Thank you, populism. And thank you to all the thickos. You're the reason we're living in this purgatory. It's like we're in Sims.
We're in the pool and the ladder's fucked off.
Right said Fred, aka wrong said maths, who can't even work out percentages, think they know more than doctors about COVID. We've got Jedward as the voice of reason. We've got a cabinet of immoral twazzocks. The simulation is broken. Wake up. Anyway, what have they done this week? Floated the idea that they're going to increase tax for the under 65s to pay for social care, even though they said in their manifesto they wouldn't, like they said they wouldn't get rid of foreign aid. So essentially they're making all the people that don't vote Tory pay for the social care of those that do vote Tory. Fucking hell. Now Tories are outraged because the Tories lied. What the fuck did you think would happen? This is why we can't have satire anymore. GBB thinks that Christopher fucking Biggins is an authority on Brexit. Next week they'll have Gordon the Gopher on, debating blood sports with Ed the Duck. We've got Gavin Williamson. Oh fuck. I would liken him to Ted Bundy, except Ted Bundy showed forward planning and was actually competent at what he did. There he is, uncanny, innit? He's trying to pin COVID cases on parents already when he's failed to ventilate the schools or put in any safety measures. They were advised on this in November 2020. They've done fuck all. Oh yeah, and they tried to smear Pen Farthing to cover up for their lack of planning in Afghanistan. It's not a debate about whose lives are worth more. It's about the government's fuck up. Talking of that, Foreign Secretary couldn't identify his own report because he doesn't read anything. But why would he? He's only Foreign fucking Secretary. They hate being held accountable. Oops. Fuck the Tories.
Well, Benjamin Loughnane mentioned the democratisation of the media, YouTube and Twitter, and we're delighted to be joined by a TikTok star, by Supertansky, who has gone viral in the... How long have you been doing this?
Probably around 2 years-ish.
Should I call you Super for short or Tansky for short?
Tan's cool.
Tan's cool.
Yeah.
You've been doing it for about 2 years?
About 2 years, yeah.
And this isn't your full-time job. You don't have a huge technical crew behind you.
No technical crew, as I think it's obvious, actually, that I don't have any crew at all, no.
But what made you do that? What made you intervene in this one?
The sheer anger at what was happening in politics. I've always been very politically engaged, but I just felt that there was just a massive injustice happening and I had to kind of voice it. And it started off with giving kind of angry names, kind of joking names to MPs, and then people really started getting interested in it. So it kind of snowballed from there, really.
And how do you go about getting people engaged in a way that they're just not?
I don't know how it happens. People just seem to like it. I think it's just the fact that it's a kind of working class voice. It's someone that is talking about things that people can relate to. And everyone can relate to, and especially at the moment in terms of the cost of living crisis. and everyone's kind of talking about how Boris Johnson's trying to cling to power. But I think the most important thing to think about is how all the people that have been affected by his policy are going to survive.
Yeah, and they're the voices who don't have a platform, who we don't hear in the mainstream.
No, they don't have a voice, and that's something that I'm very passionate about, is trying to speak for those people, because I can relate to the lives they live.
And where would you say your political engagement has always come from?
I think it probably came from my nan. She taught me about the suffragettes at a young age, women's rights. But then I've also always had a kind of really strong view on social injustice. Like I've always, any form of injustice, whether it be racism or sexism, it infuriates me, and I think that kind of comes across in the videos. There's some kind of quite colourful language, but it's kind of almost entirely involuntary. Like it just comes out of me. I can't stop it. So. But in day-to-day life, I don't think I swear that much. But when it comes to talking about because people are suffering. People are suffering. People have got inside coats at the moment to live, people are choosing between heating and eating. There are babies growing up with developmental problems because their houses are freezing. And this is Britain in 2022.
And I guess, is it the anger that those situations are true of Britain in 2022, but also that there's such a gap. The anger is also that there is such a gap between the people who make the rules, the laws, the policies, and how they actually affect real people's lives.
Absolutely, and it also comes into the media, the media class as well, like the fact that a lot of the people that are writing about this aren't affected by it, and like especially, journalists nowadays, a lot of them are kind of really skewed towards the Conservatives. And, there's a lot of concerns over the way that the Official Secrets Act might be changed. That's something that's a big concern. And what I'm trying to do is bring this to the kind of public attention, because the media aren't. I was trying to tell people on a level that they might understand. And sometimes it's not dumbing down, it's just trying to make it plain to people what they won't read about in the tabloids. Yeah.
That's really key, isn't it? Yeah.
It is.
It's brilliant. So I'd really recommend everybody following Supertansky's TikTok. Not that I'm on TikTok, I don't really know what it is.
Get on TikTok.
Get on TikTok, Jukes. Wake up out of your elitism, and also on Twitter. And we'll hopefully be able to speak to you after the show and get you back and show some more of your videos. I think exactly our mission. It's funny, you do it through humour, which is telling those stories.
To try and cut through, yeah.
And you probably cut to a different audience than us, but the same stories and keep us. So thanks so much for joining us on the show. We have overrun a little bit, I'm sorry, but we have a moment to look at our front page of the print edition, if George can bring it up now. And that's where we explore some of those issues, which actually Peter York and Benjamin and obviously Supertan is talking about. Rolling coup, where we're being left behind and those that have more. Both sides of the Atlantic. It was a tough edition to do, but we're really proud of that front page.
Yeah, and again, looking at the structures, I mean, the chaos in Downing Street will continue and continue, and in many ways we can get distracted by that and too caught up in that. The structural things that are going on now, the forces which are still there, that they're not just going to be altered by putting Joe Biden in or Rishi Sunak in the place of Boris Johnson. That's what we need to be aware of.
And one of the key structural things we look at is media, the unheard voices. We can't represent them all. People should represent themselves. And on that note, if you haven't signed up, sign up now, and you can join us for Q&A and represent yourself to our guests. But if you can't do that, we understand. Times are tight, people are short of money. Please join us. It will always be free. Our Friday show, just as our website, Byline Times, will always be free. And if you can't join us for Q&A, we'll see you this time next week.
Yes, do enjoy your weekends, everybody. Good night.
Good night.